So, morning, folks. How you doing? I hope everybody is well. Um, we got out fishing yesterday. I actually did 10.4k yesterday, which is just like a miracle to me. It's the furthest I've gone definitely since last September, and I'm fine today. So the road to recovery seems to be kind of rolling out in front of me, which is great news. Um, we fished a couple of spots. Water clarity was superb. You know, everything looked good. There were some birds feeding, some cormorants working, definitely some bait in the water, but two rods, maybe 3 hours, 3.5 hours, no fish. But that's fishing, right? You don't get them every time. If you did, we wouldn't do it, right? There wouldn't be any challenge. But I want to talk to you today a bit about open beach fishing, and this really is for people who are very new to it. If you're a seasoned angler, this probably won't be of much interest to you because you'll already know a lot of this stuff. But like, I don't know how many lure fishermen attack the open beach, right? Because it can be quite a daunting task. Like, I mean, there's miles of beach, and where do you fish, and you know, how do you decide, like where the bass are going to be, etc., etc. So, my first advice is pick a big spring low, right? So the lowest tide of the month, and go walk your beach, right? And look for feature, right? Also, get on to Google Maps or Google Earth or any of these satellite apps that'll show you your beach, images of your beach, and you'll be able to see, like, there are reefs, there are dips in the beach, da da da. You'd be amazed how much feature is actually on what looks like just a totally flat beach, right? Um, and that will attract bass. Like, for example, I fish. I should have fished local, by the way, because there was there was a competition here last weekend or whatever, and there was a good few fish caught on one of my local beaches. Now on the bait, but if they're there on the bait, you can catch them on the lures. It's just got to find the right lure, right? Um, but like, for example, on one of my beaches that I fish a lot, there's like literally just a little patch of stones. That's all it is. It's maybe 20 by 15 or whatever, something like that. It's not huge, but it always holds a fish, or nearly always. Not always, right? Because if it always held a fish, then I'd catch one every time. But it certainly attracts a lot of fish. And I mean, I remember being on it one sort of bright August afternoon and throwing a few different baits over it. I threw a needle at it and I got a bump, so I knew there was a fish there. So I rigged an offset giant X layer, flicked it in. The minute the bait hit the water, just wobbled down, bang, fish on, 71 centimeters. Middle of the day, bright sunshine, flat calm, right? So, like, the rule book says it's got to be this, it's got to be that. Throw the rule book out the window. Like, just do your thing. Go look and see. Like, you hear about this watercraft. What is watercraft? Well, watercraft is like lots of things, but it comes from experience, right? It comes from just putting the hours in. Like, you want to catch fish, you got to put the hours in. It's that simple. And you'll learn your marks, and then what you learn on your marks, you'll be able to apply to other marks, right? So, like, recently I was in West Cork. Now, I don't know West Cork at all, right? I don't know the marks, da 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 da. But when I got there, I went on to Google Maps. I drove around, I walked around a bit, and da da da, had a look around. And I could see, okay, lots of this stuff is very similar to home. I'm sure the same stuff is going to happen, right? And I was right, it did, right? And we caught a few fish, right? So, like, for example, here we have a big lagoon that empties out onto Tramore Beach, huge, big, long stretch of beach, right? And you could look at that and say, well, Jesus, like, where do I fish, right? So, well, the obvious answer is, well, both sides are going to fish, right? Just both sides of the beach. There's going to be a population of fish on at either end of the beach, right? Um, but as you walk the beach, look for places where the weed builds up, right? So most people say, "Oh, don't, well, like you want to avoid the weed." Well, no, because if the weed is building up there, then everything else is building up there, and also what's in the weed, right? Like if you turn over, you ever see like we get huge big lumps of kelp, right, blowing up onto the beach. You turn that over, it's absolutely full of life, right? Little crustaceans, shrimp, sand flea, all sorts of stuff. And bass will scavenge on that 100%. Small little hardback crabs, all of that. They'll take it, no problem. So they know that that area is an area where all that stuff builds up, so they'll be there. Right. The other thing is, if there's an estuary attached to your beach, then chances are you're going to have fish falling out of the estuary and running the beach one way or the other, right? And the only way to figure that out is to go and put the hours in and fish it. Like my advice is, it's easier to fish a drop and tide at the start if you're trying to learn a new mark, right? Um, Now this is not a rule, right? It's not like, oh, it's like this everywhere, right? I'm not saying, you know, but I tend to find that on the drop and tide, fish are feeding more or whatever. Like certainly in some of the estuaries I fish, on the rising tide, the fish kind of on the push back in, they have their head down, they're driving into the estuary, right, and they're pushing through. Now, I still catch lots of fish on the rising tide. I'm not saying you won't catch fish on the rising tide. I do. But what I find on the falling tide is that, and this is true of the beach too, right, is that fish will hold up, right? They'll have their spots where they can ambush prey, where the current pushes stuff past them, and they burrow down and they look up and wait and boom. So yeah, so that's it. Like just look for structure, get out there, walk it on the low tide, get to know it. If you find there are places where uh, like the sandbars push out or whatever, always great to explore. Sandbars, they'll attract fish, right? Their structure. I will say this: be careful, right? Just do not get cut off. Make sure that you're not doing something stupid like going out someplace where a channel. You might wade a channel, right, and get out onto a sandbar and it's fine. And you come back an hour later and it's not fine, and that's happened to me, and it's no fun. Let me tell you. So just be careful. Like when I was younger, you know, I mean, I remember tippy toeing, with the water running up to the top of my boots, and Henry Gilby's bleeding dog swimming past me. I was like, oh my God, what are we doing? But I wouldn't be doing that stuff these days. But do be careful, right? Um, the next damn question is lures. Like, what lures do I use to fish the open beach? Well, the truth is, I use all sorts, right? It just depends on the conditions. Now, I definitely fish some lures more than others, right? In the nighttime, I just have yet to find anything that can beat these bad boys, right? So these are made by a buddy of mine, Charles. I'm sure I've spoken about them at length before, right? Seawolf lures, they are just phenomenal. I honest to God, I caught so many really decent fish on them, right? You could spend an hour just talking about how to fish those and ways to fish them and why they're so productive. And like, if you look at it, it is just, I mean, perfect, right? And when you see it on the retrieve, right, you'll get it. Like I've often been on the bottom end of my local beach, and you can see these coming back on the kind of top 2 inches. And next thing you just see a fish come up and absolutely nail it. I mean, it's a knee trembling experience. It's so much fun, right? Uh, if you got a bit of surf running, these things are king, right? Or once the light fades, these things are king. But they'll also fish during the day, and you don't have to be on the beach to fish them either. We fish them in the estuary too, but I'll do a different slot where I just focus on talking about these. I want to stick to fishing an open beach. I fish surface lures quite a bit on the beach, particularly when it's calm, right? Um, they just work, simple as, right? That's the Pachinko 140, casts like a bullet, right? Oh, good man, buddy. That's the new Z Claw. And I have to hand it to Exorus, right? They've done an excellent job, right? They are the very same as the originals. Really like that white one with the just touch pink in the nose, right? Colors catch anglers, white catches bass, right? I fish those. I fish lots of different types of stick baits. I've spoken to you about these already, so I mean, I think I'm gonna just absolutely hammer fish on these this year, right? But I fished lots of different types of stick baits, and then I fished the ubiquitous paddle tail, and I fished paddle tails in all sorts of colors and all sorts of sizes. Like, mix it up, right? Find, like, some days the bass want a big lure, some days they want a small lure, right? Um, and when we're talking about small lures, I started fishing these last year, and they are absolutely fantastic. It's the little, sorry now, uncover the head, the little Mad Eel 90 from Madness. Now, Madness is a company that I've been fishing their kit for 20 years, and it's always been exceptional. Now, that one's in IU, right? You can see it's got the three, it's got some ribs in the body, and it's got a kind of a, sorry, let me slow that down. It's got a smaller paddle tail, which actually makes less action, right? And you think, oh, you need more action. Not always. Sometimes the more subtle approach actually works, right? Like, I've fished spots and had nothing, nothing, nothing. And when you get loads of those, especially early in the season, pin size sand eel, I talk about matching the hatch, right? And it comes in a lovely range of colours. Like, I don't have the 500G. It comes in 500G, which is lovely. It's that's the IU, right? And 500G is kind of, it's a bit like that, right? It's a bit like that kind of color. It's got a lovely streak of purpley, pinky kind of thingy, green awashi, lovely, right? Super, just really nice little bait. One of my favorite paddle tails of all time, right? The 1-up shad. That's the 5-inch version. I also fish it in the 4, and very occasionally I fish it in the 6, right? If I'm fishing deep water, or if I'm fishing in spots where I know some really big fish hang out, and I'm trying to imitate pollock or whatever. I mean, if you want to imitate pollock, right? Look at that. That's the tinsel brown. It's just perfect, right? I mean, just lovely. So that's it. I'm not going to wobble on any longer. Like, the way to do it is just to do it. It's just to actually go out and put the hours in, right? And you will find, and believe you me, bass will show up in the most unlikely of places, right? I was stood on the prom wall in Tremor last summer when I was too sick to fish, looking down at a shoal of bass feeding right in the middle of the town, right? You know what I mean? Like, they will show up in the most unlikely of spots, and the only way to find that out is to get out there and to do it. So those are my tips. Like, they're creatures of habit, right? So spring low, walk the beach, look for structure, right? Look for places where the sand is rippled, because that means there's a load of current run. The current doesn't run evenly across the beach, right? What you'll get is you'll get gutters and sandbars, right? And I find that the fish tend to either hang on the edge of the bars or sit on the top of it, right? Um, I like to fish, like if the current is running, like the tide is running from right to left, I like to cast up into the tide and let my lure sweep with it, right? Now you can do it the other way. Oh, yeah, and that's the other thing. Don't presume that the bass are a million miles that way. They might actually be right beside you. You'll be amazed how shallow they'll sit, right? I've been coming back from, wading out beach fishing and spooked huge fish sat in 1.5 foot of water. It doesn't bother them. They're not nervous about it, right? When we started bass fishing, we all presumed like, oh, we weren't casting far enough, and the bass were at the back of the third breaker, and that's where you had to be, and da da da. And yeah, there were bass at the back of the third breaker, but there were also bass in the wash, that if you cast down along the beach, right? And I've caught loads of fish that way, just casting literally almost horizontally, like, and just dig, 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 dig with a surface lure, boom, you know. So it's just put the hours in, get to know what winds fish best, right? So what direction is your beach fishing in? What wind will put a nice surf on it? Um, only through like fishing it will you find that out. Like, I mean, like here, right? If we get a north wind, there's a certain spot where the fish just will not go. I so many times I've been like, the northerly wind, I know they won't go there, and still we end up going in there to have a look. And every time, no, they're not there, right? Don't know what it is. They just don't like swimming into the northerly wind, right? Uh, Southeasterly wind fish is great in some places, but in other places, fish is terrible, right? There's this myth that easterly wind kills things. Well, I have spots that fish absolutely brilliantly in an easterly wind, right? But it's just through practice, not practice, but like repetition, like just putting in the hours, putting in the miles, fishing, looking, searching. So, yeah. So I hope that was helpful. I hope you learned a little bit from me. Not that I'm an expert or anything. Um, and tight lines, good luck, give it a try. It's a type of fishing I think that's going to take off a little. Well, I hope it takes off a little bit more, because surf fishing is so much fun. Like if you hook 60-65 centimeter bass in a good surf, he will give you some tug. I'm telling you, they can really fight in that. And because of the surf, the water is oxygenated, so the bass are fizzed up, right? They're switched on, and if they're feeding hard, like last year, and I'll shut up after this. Last year, I was guiding a really nice bunch of guys from the north, and we were fishing on the uh, along the edge of a local beach. And as the tide was dropping out, I mean, the bass were boiling on the surface, and the boys couldn't believe it. They'd never seen that before. Like, it's like, are those really bass? Like, no, unfortunately, on that day, they were a little bit out of reach, right? And I was undergunned, like, I needed the big rod and the sort of 50-gram lures, the big press baits and stuff would have hit them, because it was September, so they were feeding on joey mackerel, and you could see the mackerel scooting under our feet. But every now and again, like as the birds would come within range, and the minute they did, you cast, your bait hit the water, bang, fish on. So, look, just get out there, explore it on low water, put the hours in, see what winds it fishes best in, forget about the rule book, throw the rule book out, you write your own rule book, right? Yeah, that's it. So like, don't be intimidated by all the lure choices and da da da. You don't need 100,000 lures. You don't. You need some good hard lures. I always bring a sinking lure, right? I like to fish hard lures. That's the one thing I didn't tell you about. I do like to fish hard lures in the surf. So I always bring a sinking lure. This year I have a couple of different ones. So I've got the press bait 40 grams, which are lethal. And I've got Sandial Lance or something 110 sinking, right? Because when it's running hard, if it's a floating bait, it can be hard to get it down. Like, you're not going to fish um, a feed shallow into 2 foot of surf, right? You need something that'll sink that you can da 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 da. In terms of retrieving baits and stuff, let them bang off the bottom, particularly these types of guys, right? Let them bang off the bottom, because it's those puffs of sand that they send up that will attract the bass. Like anything that hits the bottom, they're interested in. They're like some onto it. So look, there's loads more I could talk about, but I don't want the clips to be too long, right? Because it gets boring. So that's just a little introduction to beach fishing. Get out there, try it for yourself, explore it, and let me know how you get on. Tight lines, everybody. Talk soon.